Part 2. I don't even know what happened there. I didn't click on anything that I was aware of. I guess I just moved the cursor and it hit something that clicked me off. So this is part 2. So what I was saying, I believe, is that the seeds of French absolutism, as we see it with Louis XIV, began in this dilemma of Louis XIII with what to do with these competing, warring, even if not in a state of civil war, Catholic and Protestant factions within France, and the power of the nobility. How do we manage this? Because that's what was going on, as well as the popular support for each of the factions. How to manage all of that. And Cardinal Richelieu really set royal policy from 1624 on till 1642, when he succeeded by Cardinal Mazarin, um, who he had chosen himself as to be his successor. Um, and the path was set, let's say, in some ways, the vision of Henry IV, in terms of Henry's own vision of how a king should be, was coming to fruition with Louis XIII and Cardinal Richelieu, realizing that the problem, or one of the problems, was the religious conflict, the confessional conflict. That then brings us to Louis XIII's son, offspring, Louis XIV, because Louis XIV was born in 1638 and Louis XIII dies in 1643. So we have another young French king who also then is under the authority of his mother, Anne of Austria, Habsburg, Spanish, Austria because of the, the Habsburg connection, because there's the House of Habsburg was based in Austria, but the Spanish connection with the Philip II, the son of Charles V, gets very messed up. Um, but she really saves France and keeps France together until Louis XIV, her son, is ready to rule. There is at this time the ongoing conflict because Louis XIII, while he set the monarchy on the path towards absolutism, was not able to really make the governmental administrative changes to bring it about. Louis XIV would. But that starts with his mother. We have, again, in the 16th and on to the 17th century, these amazing queens, because essentially that's what they were, both Marie de Medici, Louis XIII's mother, and then Anne of Habsburg, Anne of Austria, Louis XIV's mother, were amazing women, just like Elizabeth I had been, and Catherine de Medici of France had been too. They're just, and they don't get enough credit, and they really should, because these two women, Marie de Medici, the wife of Henry IV and the mother of Louis XIII, and then Anne of Habsburg, Anne of Austria, mother of Louis XIV, saved France from disintegrating further into civil war. And politically at the time, that was no easy feat. And why was that? Because when Louis XIII dies, Europe is in the midst of the 30 Years' War. And the factions between the French and the Dutch and the Germanic principalities, and then with the Scandinavian territories as well, it was a difficult situation to be here. And where does France come down with all of this? How do they decide? They're at war with Spain too. But Anne of Austria and of Habsburg put the interests of France above even her own familial connections to Spain. And Anne of Austria and Cardinal Mazarin basically served as the negotiators putting together the Peace of Westphalia, the peace treaty ending the 30 Years' War. That's the power these women had and their importance for European politics at the time. Whereas Louis XIV was still a child, even though he was recognized as the king and the leader. Now, Louis XIV, known as the Sun King, did come into his majority finally in 1661. But before then, with all these tensions and factions, including basically just after the um, 30 Years War ends with the Peace of Westphalia in 1648, there's an attempted uprising against the crown in France. It's known as the Fronde, Frond, with a 1648 to 1653. And what was the Fronde? The Fronde was an uprising of the French nobility that was standing up for their traditional rights as vassals of the king. Because what was going on, beginning with Louis XIII, and then continued even further under the regency of Anne of Austria, was the attempt to subdue the nobility for the reasons I had previously mentioned, that the only right to rebel is within the nobility. So with Louis XIII and then continuing on in the reign of Louis XIV, the idea was we have to bring the nobility into control. And they do that. We could say the process was turning the nobility from being vassals to being courtiers. Louis XIV would end up calling the nobles to court, making them live at court and serve at court instead of having their own, basically, power bases, rather than this feudal structure of I am your man from a part of the high nobility to the king, but yet I am sovereign within my own areas and territory. This idea, again, said began with Louis XIII and with Colonel Richelieu's testament, and continued under the regency of Anne and then with Louis XIV, was to bring the nobility to toe, to not to subdue and crush them, because we need the nobility, but to keep them within our authority and make sure that they know that they're under our authority and almost that they serve as at our pleasure. And there were a faction of the nobility that resented that attempt and wanted to hold on to their feudal understanding of their role. It was being changed by Louis XIV, having been begun to have been changed by Louis XIII. So there was this uprising in Paris. They even got into Louis XIV's bedroom when he was a child still, and he played that he was asleep. They didn't kill him there, but it scared Louis. He knew the danger the nobility could be to him and his rule, and consequently to France. So when he does ascend his majority, he